Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Rami Ismail, Vlambeer co-founder, which has put out games such as Ridiculous Fishing, Nuclear Throne, and Luftreisers, currently working as a consultant, one-third of the Habibis podcast, and PressKit maintainer. Hi, Rami. How are you doing today?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking. And also, thank you so much for making time and agreeing to join me today.
Oh, absolute pleasure. It seems like it'll be a fun chat.
Fingers crossed. I don't think I've ruined it for anyone yet. However, knock on wood.
Yeah.
So, Rami, before we do get started, though, if you don't mind, could you maybe tell me and anyone listening a little bit about yourself, just so we have a better idea of who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Rami Ismail. I'm a game developer. I've been making games in some form or capacity since I was probably like 6 years old. They weren't any good, don't get me wrong. Like, it took a long time before I actually got good at what I do. I founded a studio back in 2010, as you mentioned, Vlambeer. We did a bunch of games that were really well received, that did really well. And then, sort of in the wake of that, I was raised Dutch Egyptian. And I kind of got curious about, I saw other people making games in the Netherlands, but not necessarily so many in Egypt. I started sort of looking into how game development around the world is growing and whether it's accessible and whether it's equitable and whether it's fair. And I've sort of made that my mission over the past 10 years to make the games industry more fair around the world. So really the things people know me for is either if people are gamers, they might know me from Vlambeer, from Nuclear Throne, from Ridiculous Fishing, from Luftreisers, all kind of games that sort of helped establish genres. If people are in industry, it's more likely they'll know me from my work doing advocacy for a more equitable games industry, or from my work on PressKit, which you already mentioned as well, which was free tools and other free things that I try to create as ways to make the games industry more democratized. So that's kind of what I do. And then, yeah, I now consult with game studios. I'm working on dozens of games, just trying to help teams build healthy and constructive teams that make the best games they can possibly make.
So, thank you for explaining all that. And, that's a really admirable goal to try and I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. But I'll roll it back a little to something that you said that I really like that I think will make it easier to understand for anyone listening. The equitable part, because a lot of people have trouble understanding, equality, equitable. I don't know the appropriate way to phrase that one after equality. But introducing something like that to game development or having that as a focus of it, I think is really admirable, just because we can always see, how different studios work, how capitalism in general works and all of that fun stuff, not to just aggressively brush it off to the side, but something that is often missing in a lot of ways is equitable or equity, sure. And I just think that's really admirable to be trying to introduce more into the system for everyone that can benefit from, as opposed to just the, aggressive capitalism machine. And we all know what that arguably can do or usually does. So, I think it's admirable. It's, the whole
Thank you.
part of that.
I think it's also partially a little selfish. I mean, when you think about it, I'm Dutch Egyptian, and for me, realizing that, when my parents decided that we would live in the Netherlands, that was that's such a big part of my career. It gave me the visa that allows me to travel. It allowed me to get raised in a country where I got taught English very, fluently. I had lots of opportunities to make bad decisions in my life, like becoming a game developer and dropping out of university. All of these things would not have been possible if I was in Egypt, right? So part of it is, I believe that there are kids like me out there that want to do the same thing, and I would hate to not be able to play their games in the future because they never got that opportunity. The other side of that, though, is I just really like video games. And the thing I've realized is that video games are a reflection of the people that make them, right? Their culture, their artistic expression. People make games because they believe that certain things will be good or interesting, and part of that is how they were raised, the art they grew up with, the movies they watched, the music they grew up with, the games they played in the street, or the board games, or the languages that they speak. All of those things feed into what people make, and I realized this very deeply traveling the world. But if you take like if let's take like a very common genre, if you take like war games, right? Like games about war. If you would look at a U.S. game about war, very frequently it will be about going to a faraway country to fight for some sort of like greater justice. And kind of the worst thing that can happen in the game is that your main character dies, right? Because that's sort of the way the US learns about war. It's this thing that happens abroad, and then not coming home is sort of like the scariest thing, right? That somebody would not come home. Um, but then you take something like Spec Ops: The Line, which is a German-based game about war, and no matter how you play that game, the outcome is always very negative, right? It's a game about shame and about guilt and about making mistakes and whether war is ever worth it. And that makes a lot of sense when you look at war from a German perspective, you know, the country that most famously known for World War II when it comes to war. You know, the Germans grow up with a lot of shame around the topic of war and a lot of guilt around the topic of war, and it makes sense that a German-made game about war would have those values. And then you take a Polish game about war, and you get a game like This War of Mine, which isn't a game about going to war; it's a game about war going to you, and how you survive that as just mere citizens trying to survive in a place where everything is exploding and people are fighting, and you're just trying to stay alive. And to me, suddenly seeing that at some point in my career, at some point in my travels, realizing that South African games have a very different flavor than a Dutch game has a very different flavor than sometimes even within a country, right? If you take a game from the north of Brazil, it's going to be a different game than the south of Brazil. A game from San Francisco is going to be different than a game from New York. Um, when I started seeing that, I started realizing that if the world is more fair, we'll just get more games. We'll get more interesting games. We'll get more takes on games. We'll get more takes on genres, and that, yeah, that's just incredibly exciting to me. So,
And you know, like I completely understand what you are saying, and like I think maybe the best way to put it, maybe to summarize, I shouldn't say to put it, in my opinion, is the emphasis on like representation mattering, right? Like I know a lot of people use that, and it can mean a lot of different things, but in this case, the representation mattering is the perspective of the people making the game and how that influences them. And as you touched on, like with the war example, with several games that can use it, but like the focus on the country or the person or the area's upbringing is going to 100% influence how their perspective of that game is presented, right? And I think that's one of the reasons I really am impressed by a lot of indie games that are coming out from all over the place. And like you'll often see like common threads or common takes on things in some one way or another, but then you have like the way that they are presenting those threads or those stories or what have you. And I just think it's fantastic when more people with more or different life experiences or what have you are able to have the opportunity to present that and express themselves in a way. And like similar to what you said, like them being able to get their game played, is being able to like help or be able to see that or what have you. It's just absolutely fantastic because, it's the one of like the best ways to experience things from out of your own comfort zone. And I say comfort zone in air quotes here because, there's a lot of people that just have like never left their city of like 100,000 people in their entire life, right?
Right.
So that could be their comfort zone, but like just getting to experience things that are out of what they're used to can just hopefully like help people realize there's more to the world than just what they know, just what they're used to,
Yeah.
right? Like expand their mind, expand their uh, views, and all of that fun stuff. Not to diminish or brush it away. It's just there's a lot of things that could be said to encompass it. So all of
Yeah.
expand their mind or what have you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that is obviously sort of where the games have that very unique possibility of making people sort of like take different perspectives and sort of inhabit them. You know, I was talking about Papers, Please earlier to somebody, and just in how incredibly powerful that game was about making very complex issues like corruption very understandable, very human. It's not something you could easily do, but through the systems, the game really sort of like plays with that and plays with that idea. And for me, that's just so powerful that any cultural expression, like games, gameplay, mechanics, rules, they all supersede language. Like you don't need to speak to each other to understand that if I kick a ball to you, that I want you to kick it back. Um, and I can play games with people from all around the world. So that means that they're this global language. I just want everybody to speak it. That's my mission, to allow anybody to speak the language of games. And whether how people are heard or how much people are heard, that's a secondary question. It's obviously an important question because it defines your opportunity of making games commercially. But the first step is just making sure that everybody understands that they can make games and allowing them the tools to make games. And then, it's a secondary thing to sort of create a commercial reality in which that is possible because the world works the way it does. And even though I don't love that, it's not worth. It's not going to be possible in my lifetime to fix that. So instead, let's just make sure we make the best time, right?
Yeah, and yes, I understand completely what you're saying, and I would it would be wrong of me to try and argue otherwise, because yeah, like it's at the end of the day, it's we're a very long ways off from that changing, and at some point, you just kind of have to accept how to make it work best with the in with the situation or what have you, right? Um,
Right.
and there's a better analogy I could have made there, but I'm not. I
I
wasn't
think for
on
me,
my ball.
it's very much the question of like, yes, I could try and fight this really big thing and maybe make a small difference. But that's not the fight I'm good at. The fight I'm good at is this one, right? The thing I'm good at is doing this, which is trying to make what we have as accessible and as democratic and as fair as possible. I'm very good at that. So I'm just going to keep doing that. And then I hope that other people that are better at those things will fix those things. Um, and everybody gets to do their part, and I think even just democratizing a space shows the value of these different perspectives and makes it more clear that it's valuable that those perspectives are heard. And that's my little contribution to hopefully making the world a better place.
And that is I would say that's a pretty good a view or stance or what have you to take because uh, a lot of people fighting little battles can if the more that are fighting the little battles, the better it's going to be in the long run, as opposed to one person struggling really hard against a big battle, just because
Yeah.
something about in numbers. I'm sorry, I can't think of the right phrase, but like strength in numbers. There we go, strength in numbers, and and how like that impacts. So I understand what you're saying, and I agree completely. The more people that are doing what they can and doing it successfully, the better it is in the overall health, in the bigger scheme of things. Now,
I think, yeah.
so Rami, I do want to ask this just because, you had mentioned that you started making games when you were about 6.
Right.
And and one of the first, I want to say, commercial successes maybe, or one that got a lot of attention, at least, was Ridiculous Fishing. So, like,
Mhm.
between the ages of 6 and that, how did you get into
Right.
developing and making games?
I mean, really, what happened is, early on when I was young, um, we didn't have this obsession with everything just working, right? Like that was sort of like the old mindset of computers is if they work, that's good enough, and they don't have to just work. Not everything had to feel like magic. That was sort of like Apple's approach to things. But back in the days, computers were very much controlled with code and with commands and terminals and command lines and stuff like that. So when I got to use my first computer, a really large part of it was uh, just typing codes into things, and very often those computers would come with tutorial files, and one of those tutorial files was for a programming language called QBasic, and the file was called Gorillas, and it was a little video game, and it was a two-player game, and I would play that with friends or with family. But to play the game, you would have to load the code and then run the code. And I got curious about the code. I changed some stuff about the code, and now instead of the name of the game, it would show my name. And to me, that was fascinating that I changed words in text. And then when I played the game, it was a different game. So I went and just kept doing that and broke the computer multiple times. My dad would have to go fix the computer so often. Um, and Yeah, from there, I just kind of, like I never played a game. That was my first game. Gorillas was my first game. And honestly, um, the the honest truth is from that point on, the way I looked at games was always from that perspective as what can I change to make it different. So my favorite games all were games that, you know, had like level editors or modding abilities, or like the files were not encrypted, so you could just change numbers in the files. I turned strategy games into racing games. In StarCraft, I made an RPG. In Age of Empires, I made campaigns. In everything, I tried to see how I could break it, rework it, rewrite it, reapproach it. Um, and that's what I did for like 15 years or something. Um, and it was such a good time. I started working with some developers that were actually making things from scratch. I volunteered for a game studio. An indie game studio. And then eventually I went to Game Design University when I learned that was a thing you could actually do. Enrolled in it, had a terrible time, dropped out, started a game studio. And then the first thing we did was actually not Ridiculous Fishing, but Radical Fishing, which is a Flash game. Um, then that Flash game made us some money. We did Super Crate Box, which won a bunch of awards. And then from that point, things kind of took off, and we very rapidly realized that with this new thing called the iPhone, the App Store, that we wanted to do a version of Radical Fishing for iPhones for the App Store. So we did. And yeah, that's when things got really weird.
um, I think there's, I don't, I don't want to, I don't know if this is the appropriate place to bridge that topic, but for anyone, if I'm not mistaken, weird means a lot of different things in this context, does it not?
I mean, it changed my life from being a indie game developer that has or had traditionally like always been relatively poor. Um, Nobody knew who I was or what I did. A few people knew in the indie scene, and nobody had really played much of my work. To somebody who had money, um, which allowed me to travel around the world and meet all those developers and start my work on making the industry more equitable. But somebody who had resources, somebody who was known in the industry, and somebody who like I met Elijah Wood, and Elijah Wood is a fan of my work. That's weird. Like you don't meet Frodo Baggins and go like, "Hey," and they go like, "Oh, you're really good fishing. That's awesome." So things just kind of got weird.
Yes.
The way to make a game of that skill, an Apple Design Award, Game of the Year. Uh, it worked. I got on the Forbes 30 under 30. We were BAFTA nominated. Like, just I was at like a Hollywood thing where that one guy that only played James Bond once. What's his name? George Lazenby. George Lazenby gave me a back rub uh, because he was trying to get out of. He was trying to get out of the. He was getting trying to get out of the room, but he wanted to do it sort of subtly, and we had a really good conversation. So he just stood. As he got up, he stood behind me, put his hands on my shoulders, gave me a quick back rub, and basically said like, "Mate, it was a pleasure, but I'm out," and then just left. And he left in the most James Bond possible way, and I was like, "Oh, I see what happened there." Um, but like life just kind of got weird. Not what I expected to be doing at all. Um, so it basically life got weird. Like I have no better way of phrasing that sentence.
Yes, I understand. I understand completely the context that you were meaning. I misunderstood, and I was thinking you were implying or inferring the constant battles with and this is what I meant by probably not the platform or the place to discuss that, but the constant battles with all the clones and the fighting
Oh
there. I thought that's the route you were going with weird, but
no!
no, I
Funnily
completely
enough,
understand.
that was before the launch. That was the like the weird thing about the game getting cloned is that happened before launch, and I think the beauty of that whole story to me is that it taught me that bad things happen. Like bad things happen, they become part of your journey, but it's not the journey is not the bad thing happening to you. It's what you do with the bad thing happening to you, right? Because people sometimes ask me, "Aren't you happy you got cloned because so many people paid attention to the story?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not. Like it was awful. Like it ruined my life for like a good 6 months to a year." But we got the team back together. We got everything back together. We rallied. We rallied the games industry behind us. We rallied international media behind us. Um, and the way we dealt with it allowed it to become what is, in hindsight, a clear victory. But it's. I don't love quoting famous people, but I think Steve Jobs once said you can never connect the dots. You can only connect the dots in hindsight. And it's one of those cases, like in hindsight, everything there happened exactly the way it should have.
Mhm.
Um, but still, like, I'm still not happy I got cloned. If I can go back and not be cloned, I would prefer that. Um, but I'm proud of how we handled it.
And that makes complete and perfect sense because I I've never had something cloned like that, so I can't speak from a place of um, knowledge, I guess you would say, in the same way that other people that have been in situations like yourself can. However, I I'm fairly confident that I could say it would not be a fun time. It would be nothing but headache and stress and like
Right.
none headache and stress is never fun. So, it's completely understandable why, you would not have preferred that in the long run, right? Like, if
Right.
you could redo and have that not happen again, would probably be a better thing for your health, for your mental health, for just everyone involved. But like you said, um, related or unrelated to the cloning, you can only really connect the dots to everything once the dust settles, right?
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, then, Rami, and I don't know where this one's gonna go, just because, uh, as you said, things got weird.
Yeah.
But do you have any words of wisdom that you could share from your experiences from, how you got into making games or what have you surrounding the developing and making of games?
I mean, I think in general, the thing about making games, it's an art, right? And the one thing I've realized about art is that the only way to get good at art is to focus on it, but not over focus on it. Um, I think a lot of the best game developers I meet are people that love games, make games, love making games almost more than they love playing games, or definitely more than they love playing games. and they find in it some sort of way of expressing themselves or their world or their reality, even if they're doing something as simple as like, creating trees or rocks for a AAA game. Like there is a personal craft and pride in it that is important to them, but they're not so focused on it that they don't have any other part of their identity. Right? Like the best game developers I know love games, but they're also cooks, or they also love going on bicycle rides or road trips, or they draw, or they are obsessed with like 1970s documentaries or whatever it is, right? Um, but like spend time doing games, but don't make it all you are, because at that point you don't have anything new to say anymore. You just say the things that already exist.
So, thank you. That is I think that's wonderful advice for games and in general, really. But, I think that's just wonderful advice because it goes kind of back to earlier about who you are and what you've experienced and such feeding into what you do. And, if you're exposing yourself to different things, I shouldn't say it that way, but but like, if you allow more than just one thing to be what you are, you're going to have all of that other stuff that can influence everything that you are, right? So, thank you. I think that's just wonderful advice.
Cheers.
So, I am curious about this one, and I don't know if it's going to be, and I'm curious because I don't know if it's going to be the Gorilla game or if there was another game. If Gorilla was kind of like the appetizer or the moose bouche or whatever, however you want to use it. But what was the game that made you want to get into making games? And if it was Gorilla, that makes sense, but.
It was Gorillas, yeah. No, I mean there's a lot of games on that journey that were part of that, and I think you can't really say it was just Gorillas because that wouldn't have been it. Like StarCraft, Age of Empires, Urban Assault, there were so many games on the way. Quake, Unreal Tournament, so many games on the way there that were a big part of it. But like if you had to bring it back to like the singular moment where I kind of ended up on this life path, it just was Gorillas. And it wasn't even that the game was particularly good or enjoyable or special. No, just straight up was that it was the thing that taught me that code and games are connected and that you could change one by changing the other.
And like I said, I didn't know where that was gonna go because I've asked this question before, and sometimes it's the very first thing that like got their feet wet is just sort of like a back thought or a backdrop to like what comes next. But I've had it, like I can speak to the fun of what you did with like Gorilla, and because I've followed tutorials for things before, and like at the end product, you're like, oh, this is cool. And then, getting to get in there and start tweaking things and breaking things can be a lot of fun and can really inspire you to see what else you can break or what else you can tweak and do. And like you said, at the end of the day, the game that you start in Gorilla, in this case, the game that you started with, for whatever it did, by the time you're finished, it's an entirely different thing. Has no, like, if you held it up to a mirror, it wouldn't look anything like it or what have you. But like, it's still like the process of all of that. And that, I can speak to that being just sometimes incredibly fun and crazy and just seeing what dumb stuff you can do to make it work. Or in your case, what you can do to break the computer and have to have your father come and redo everything to make it usable again. So, Rami, with that one in mind, then we'll shift to a different question about games and kind of like in a parallel, I guess. But like, do you have a favorite game? Like, do you have a game that if you were to close your eyes and try and think about that, it instantly transports you to like a moment in your life, and that every time you touch that game, you're back to that moment. Like, do you have a favorite game like that? And if so, if you're okay of sharing it, what game is that? And like, why is that
Oh,
your favorite?
yeah, there's many, but um, let's see. I mean, if you would ask me favorite game, it changes occasionally, but it's been fairly stably near Automata for the past like few years. I thought that was a really clever use as video games, but it was really a game that only works if to use the earlier metaphor, if you speak video games well. Near Automata is as far as I'm concerned, close to a flawless sort of meditation on what games are. Um, it was really interesting. I think part of why I like that is actually related to another game that I might mention, which is Final Fantasy 15, and it's specifically 15. I've always wanted a road trip game. That was the first road trip game, but that game has a very specific meaning to my life, which is that it was the first video game I convinced my mom to play, and at the time my mom was in her early 60s, and she'd been following my career forever, but she'd never really played a game. And I just kind of caught her off guard at one day with just like, hey, what if I just put a PlayStation down here and we'll just try you playing a video game. And we she ended up learning dual stick on Final Fantasy and then played through all of Final Fantasy 15. And I think that game and just sitting with my mom on the couch and just sort of like watching her learn video games was fascinating. But then it also made me realize just how much I have been sort of inundated with the video games language. Like, you like to think that video games kind of make sense, but watching my mom play, I wasn't entirely sure anymore because I don't know, did you play Final Fantasy 15?
I have not actually had the chance to. The short and long of it is, I have to be careful with RPGs just because they're huge time sinks, right? So I have to like find a time that I'm comfortable slotting one in. That's the short and long of it. But anyway, sorry, back to you.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So early on in Final Fantasy 15, you come across this character named Arden, and Arden is very clearly the Japanese trope of an unreliable antagonist. They might be an antagonist, but they might also not be an antagonist, or they might not be an antagonist. So they're kind of presented in this sort of ambiguous but like kind of sneery way, where they could turn out to be a secret ally in the third act of the game, but they could also turn out to just be the bad guy all along, right? And you come across him in a place called Golden Key, where he sort of like sneers at you, and he's wearing all black, and like one of his arms has like the way his garb is, it kind of looks like a wing, and he has this hat and he has this long purple hair, and he kind of sneers at you, like he has like this little theme song that is like his musical theme is like a little discordant, like it just doesn't it's not, he has this vibe, that just is off. And I was so excited for mom to meet Arden because this was like day 5 or 6 of her playing, and she'd done some wild stuff. She'd rejected the opening quest because she was asked to bring a package from town A to town B, and she's like, I'm a crown prince, I'm not bringing a box. And I was just like, okay, you know what, let's see how she reads Arden as a character, like how did like it. Am I reading so much into that because I've played so many games, or is this just genuinely sort of like, okay, he's kind of iffy? So she calls me, because she would call me every day when she just started gaming. She calls me and she goes, well, Rami, I got the Golden Key, and there was this really shady man. And I'm like, tell me about it. And she's like, yeah, I don't know, he was wearing all black, and he was being kind of weird, and I talked to him, and I'm like, and she's like, yeah, and then he just went like, hey, you want to buy guns? And I'm like, wait, what? Like, what are you talking about? Do you want to buy guns? She's like, yeah, he was just like, you want to buy like knives and guns and like other stuff? And I'm like, what? She's like, so I ran away. I'm like, okay. So I booted up the game and I went to Golden Key, and it turns out right before where you meet Arden, right before that trigger zone, there's a shopkeeper. And he's just standing in the corner with the shopkeeper icon above him, and he's wearing all black. And my mom talked to him, And yes, the guy goes, "Hey, you want to buy guns?" Because it's a shopkeeper. But to my mom, that was a random dude standing on a dock going, "Hey, you want to buy guns?" So my mom was like, "Nope, I don't trust this." And she ran away. So she never got to Arden. She never got to that trigger zone because she got scared by the shopkeeper. And I was just like, oh my god, that makes so much sense. If I came across a random guy that went, "Hey, you want to buy a bazooka?" I'd be like, "Yep, nope, I don't want to talk to you." Um, but my mom was bringing 60 years of life into video games, and I'm bringing 30 years of video games into life. And they're different, they're different ways of coming at games. But for me, Final Fantasy 15 will always remain the game that I attached to my mom, I think. And then finally, I would have to say Destiny, but that's just because it's been my capital G game for the past 10 years now. I've always been a big Bungie fan, and Destiny hits every button for me. Like, I'm a big lore nerd. I love games with too much lore. I love action games. They have such good game feel. Great social experience. I use it as Skype. I use it as Discord, to catch up with friends. I'll just play Destiny with them. So yeah, many, many, many games that mean so much to me. And that's not even getting into indie stuff, that's just the big ones.
So, thank you for all of that. The thing I'm going to focus on the most, though, through everything you just said. Yes, I agree. Nier Automata is a fantastic game. I think that Yoko Taro does a fantastic job with all of the things that he directs, subverting expectations or making a game, or in some cases a game where he doesn't want you to enjoy yourself. Anyway, Yoko Taro does great work. I understand what you're talking about for Destiny, but the thing I'm focusing on the most is the absolute wonder or pleasure, I should say, that you probably had getting to experience Final Fantasy V through your mother.
Yes.
Because that the thought of coming across a shopkeeper, which, like, as you said, for someone that's not aware of how the games typically work, having someone dressed in black standing in the corner off to the outside of the area of what have you, saying, "You want to buy some guns?" I completely understand the response of going, "Oh, I got to get out of here. This is a shady place for," and even going back further with her saying, "I'm the prince. I'm not going to be doing, these back and forth deliveries. Get the post office to do it." So, like, for someone that's investing and role playing the character that well, regardless of how sheltered a prince may be, mixed with this being your mother's 60 years or so of life experience and not game experience, saying, "This is not the place for the prince right now. I gotta run."
Yep.
It's
Incredible.
Yes.
She's the first time I realized that it's really weird that all of us gamers have agreed that a cracked wall means we need to break it. Like, that's structurally really unsafe to the building. And my mom actually asked about one time when there was a cracked wall. She's like, "Hey, if I break this, does the building come down?" I'm like, that's a very fair question. It won't. That's just shorthand for there's a secret behind here. She's like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, no, she's been playing games for like almost 5 years now. She's done everything: Shadow of the Colossus, Dragon Age, Persona. She's doing God of War Ragnarok right now. She's played the Horizon games. Like, my mom has played a lot of video games by now. So, I feel like we've reached the point where my mom is relatively fluent in video games, and actually she recognizes things like, the little camera pull in the third person game that kind of says like, "Hey, you're in control of the character again." That kind of stuff. She now recognizes that, and that's just fascinating to have seen her grow into games. And she loves games. Like, she spends 1 or 2 hours every other day playing games, and she always says she's gotten entirely new worlds added to her life, and I think that's just incredible.
So yeah, again, thank you for sharing the about your mother. I should say thank you for sharing your mother in this situation, um,
Yeah,
because that's absolutely magical to hear. Just because, like, I think, and I think what I'm gonna say is gonna resonate really well with you and anyone else. But like, when you've been playing games for so long, the it's a lot harder for the magic and the wonder to re-experience that for the first time, right? Like, um, you can play games and you really only get to experience that once or twice. And when you've been doing it for, your entire life, that once or twice in a lot of these cases was, like years and years ago. In my case, like I'm 35, that's, over 30 years ago, I had those first experiences.
yeah,
And I, and it's rare now to have them again. And when it happens, I'm, it's a wonderful thing just because it's like, oh, this game is, as weird or what have you as to say, oh, it's making me feel again, but it's, it's you're re-experiencing that feeling again. But like being reminded that that is something that happens, is just fantastic. And I'm, like I said, thank you for sharing that, but sharing your mother. And I'm, I imagine it's just been wonderful getting to re-experience a bunch of those like first time feelings again through her, right?
yeah, yeah. It's been wonderful.
I'm sorry though, the just the mental image of someone rolling up on a shopkeeper and being like, guns, oh no, this is not for me, I gotta go. It just,
Yeah, so sensible, so
yes,
sensible.
yes, like it's very sensible, even in the context of certain things. You'd
Yep.
have to be like, oh no, sorry, I just beat someone down with a bat over there because they seem dangerous, but you also seem dangerous.
Yep.
I shouldn't be conversing with you.
Yeah. For reals.
Okay. Anyway, try to recompose myself to not just have to roll back to that thought process again, and at least until later. I can revisit that in my own time and laugh
Yeah.
about the joy of knowing someone that something like that has happened and existed.
Yeah.
Um, um, so I'm gonna ask this, and I don't know how it's going to go because you kind of touched on it with how you enjoy Destiny, um and it's the social aspect and what have you. So
Mhm.
I don't know if this is going to be kind of similar or what have you, but
Yeah.
how do you enjoy gaming now, and like what is it that you enjoy about gaming now?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question because obviously having become a game developer, I know game developers at pretty much every major studio, like their friends, their colleagues, people that I've met, people that are fans of me, people that I'm a fan of. So obviously I don't look at games the same way I used to. And right, somebody once explained it to me as it's like magicians. Either you know the trick and you can appreciate it for not understanding how it works. Either you don't know the trick and you can understand it for not knowing how it works, or you know the trick and you can appreciate it for how well it's executed. And I'm at the point where, for most games, I enjoy them for how well they're executed. For, oh my God, that's clever. Oh my God, that's smart. Oh, that's such a good twist. That's such a smart way of looking at it. Oh, the production on this must have been really rough. Like, I can't believe they had the confidence to do something like this. So I'm looking at games in a very different way than I used to. It's very rare that a game sort of recaptures that, like, where I'm just so off balance by what is happening in the game, or what they made, that I genuinely just forget to think about that. And it's usually just for a moment, where there's just a moment that's so well done that the magic sort of like grabs again. But the way I experience games is mostly as a magician that knows how the trick is done. So I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, that's really good execution on that sleight of hand. Oh my God, that's a really good sort of like a way of capturing the audience's interest. And that's honestly, I've really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed looking at games that way. Um, and it makes it extra special when a moment or a sequence in a game makes me forget about it.
So I understand, I can understand what you're saying, and thank you for sharing that. But I definitely understand what you're saying, because the when you start to, and for you, it's probably going to be even more. I don't want to say aggressive, but something you notice even more. But like, when you start noticing standard tropes or story elements or what have you, you start expecting them and waiting for them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're when you know what's coming, your mind can build something up, and being able to, instead be impressed by how it's delivered, like you said, the seeing the sleight of hand and going, oh, that's a nice sleight of hand. I think that's a really interesting approach or a take, just because it makes sense, right? Like when you know the train wreck. That's a bad example. um, but when you know the big set piece is coming, and you have an idea of what the player, like what the characters are going to be, similar to the Final Fantasy with Arden, I believe you said his name was. Like you
Yeah,
see him and you're like, oh, I have an idea. I have this guy pegged. You have an expectation of
yeah,
what's probably going to happen, and having it done, even if you were like, oh, I knew it, but having it done in a way that's like better than what you expected, or like that set piece being even bigger than what you would have ever expected or
right.
planned or what have you. So I get what you're saying, and like well, at least I think I get what you're saying, and I that makes perfect sense, because then you can appreciate the journey as
Yeah,
well as the end result, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's very much about, I think of it as a crafts person looking at a craft. It's like you see what they're doing and you see how they're doing it, and the sort of like effort and love and care that must have gone into something, and it just makes it more beautiful to me.
Thank you. That is a far better analogy that I think is more approachable or understandable. But no, yes, thank you. That makes perfect sense as well. Yes. So, Rami, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, I do want to ask this question. I do want to throw it out there.
Okay.
And outside of games, what do you do? What do you enjoy doing? What do you do to relax? I know that anyone that may follow you on Twitter knows you fly planes.
I
Um,
do.
so what, like, I don't know how much of that builds into outside of games and how you like what you do to relax or what have you. But you know, outside of gaming, who are you? What do you do? What is
So
it, things for fun?
I'm a fairly boring person, I think, in general. Like I wake up my days at a set time, I have breakfast at a set time, I have my routines, I practice piano, I do a little bit of a workout. Um, I like cooking, so I cook like almost every day when I'm at home. When I'm traveling, obviously don't really have that luxury. Um, and then yeah, sort of the things where things get a little weird again is I've always wanted to be a pilot, so I fly airplanes, Cessnas, Pipers, small single engine airplanes. That's been a really lovely hobby because it takes my mind off of everything else. Like if you're flying, you got to be focused on flying. It's kind of important. Um, I like Lego. I build a lot of Lego. I've realized that the reason I build Lego is because Lego tells me what to do, and when I do it, it works out. Um, which, as an entrepreneur, that is like an amazing feeling to have somebody else tell you, like, do this, this, and this, and then it just works. It's great. It's awesome. Um, and yeah, beyond that, I don't really do all that much. I have friends, watch movies. I don't really watch TV series, play board games. Um, I like road trips, but I'm in the Netherlands, so it's a small country, so I mostly do that when I'm abroad. Um, I have a very set routine, like Saturday I visit mom, on Sunday I visit dad. And I think I just kind of need that anchoring because so much of my life is so ridiculous that having other things be stable is really important to me. So yeah, fly airplanes, play piano, and cook. I think that would be the thing. I read a lot as well. I don't know. I just do things, I think.
So, I am a fan of the statement I just do things. I've personally been using I do and I don't do things for years, and I'm just hearing someone else say I do things with a question mark is fantastic to me, just because it's
The question mark is so important. You're so right.
like, like, I do things. I don't, it's hard to, as you were trying to or I shouldn't say as you were trying, but as you were kind of struggling there with, trying to quantify what it is you do, but like a lot of, and the reason I asked this because as mundane as it might sound to you, right? And you kind of said having your own grounding, your own anchoring. I think it's also important when talking to game developers or people in general that are part of industries that are kind of I don't want to say smoke and mirrors, have like a curtain behind them, up in front of
Right.
them, and you have to like pull it behind. Um, a lot of people sometimes just forget behind that curtain is a person that
Yeah.
likes to read, likes to practices playing the piano, does Lego. It's I I use humanizing, but not to like the full extent in this scenario because it's kind of like weird, uncomfortable almost even for me to put it in this context. But like it 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 lets other people see that like, oh no, it's just another human. Like
Yeah.
it's someone like my brother, my uncle. It's like they're and so yes, I understand the question mark is because it's for us when you answer that personally from a personal level, you're just like, well, it's just what I do, I guess, right? Like,
Right.
but thank you for sharing that is where I'm really getting to right now because you know
Thanks for
it
asking.
yeah, no problem. Like I said, the idea of being able to like make it harder for people to be upset at game developers because they like change the gun damage of their favorite Destiny weapon or what have you. Like,
Yeah.
anything that makes it easier for someone to not be mad because it's an actual person and not just like a corporate cog, right? Because we all have that problem, I think, and forgetting that you, Rami, are a person that likes to cook and visit your mother on Saturday and your father on Sunday. Like, it's hard sometimes looking at like the games of it and just not
Right.
remembering that
Yeah.
people are people.
Yep. Yeah. And I've made that mistake in the past as well, and I've been fortunate enough to work in this industry and see behind the curtain enough that I can't see games without seeing the people behind them anymore. Things like this do help. So that's why I said thank you for asking. Like, it's not a question I get all that often. But I obviously like those are all things I enjoy about my life, so I like talking about them. So I appreciate you asking.
Yeah, and you're very welcome, and also to speak to, how you said you were susceptible to that. And like that's partly why I'm trying to do what I'm doing with the podcast, just because I've myself have been susceptible to that, and um, being able to quickly address it instead of becoming incredibly toxic is only good for the community, right? Like the more,
Yeah.
though I should say, the less people are toxic. So the more we have less toxic people, the healthier everything's going to be, hopefully in the long run. Um, I hope and or
I
think.
hope I hope so too.
But anyway, Remy, I did not mean to go down a weird pseudo
No, I was
philosophical what have you there, but thank you for answering the question, and thank you for sort of sitting there through a weird um,
much
rant
appreciated.
slash
Honestly,
preaching.
no, I think I mean it makes very clear what your sort of like thesis is for this podcast, and that's always cool. Like like you, I love hearing why people do what they do, you know, and why people take, you know, like making a podcast. I run the Habibis. I know it's a lot of work to do. So hearing why you do that for me also is just you know, really interesting. So, you know, thanks for sharing. The same way you say that, like, and it's cool. Like people just do things because they see that there is a need or a want or an opportunity. And when that combines with like personal interest and that motivation to do it, beautiful things can happen. And, you know, something like this podcast is a great example of that. So, you know, thanks for sharing.
Thank you. You're very welcome, and thank you for your kind words. I think is the best thing to say to that. However, Rami, like I said, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So if there was anything else you did want to discuss, you know, a cool game, what else you're doing, or something you feel more people should be more aware of, by all means, the floor is yours. As you know, as well, please let everyone else know where they can find more information about you, and I'll make sure to include that information in the episode description.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, if people are listening, I think they already understand that the people in the industry are people, so I don't really have to remind people of that. But you know, I would always ask, like, if you can, try and see if you can find some games from places that you normally wouldn't look for games for, whether that's a different store or a different place, or hopping on itch.io or looking for games from specific countries. There's incredible stuff being made that doesn't always rise to the top, and it's just worth for fun just exploring that sometimes. If you want some recommendations, I post recommendations all the time. So if you want to find me on the internet, at this point, while Twitter is still alive, you can find me on Twitter, @PHA_Rami. But you can also find me on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on my own website. I have a newsletter. If you are interested in game development and you want to learn more, you can find that as well. So all of that you can find on RamiIsmail.com. All the links, all my social medias, ways to contact me or follow me. So if you want to stay in touch, find me there. And yeah, that I think. Oh, if you want to check out my mom's gaming adventures, you can find her on twitch.tv/momvsffxv. Mom versus Final Fantasy 15.
So thank you for that, for the shout out back to your mother, because I think, you know, I think other people might be just as interested to experience that magic as you are, or as you were able to, you know.
Yeah.
As for everything else, oh, sorry.
It's a great no commentary gameplay stream. If you wanna watch games without commentary, Mom does not do commentary. She does not have a mic. She just shares so that if she gets stuck, some people from the community or I can look and like help her out. So, you know, it's it's a very practical stream.
Which, you know, I think makes it even more endearing because, you know, it's a very like you said, it's a very singular purpose, and that is to get help when help is needed, right?
Yep.
Or required, sorry. But outside of that, you know, definitely we'll put all that information in the episode descriptions for you, so that way people can follow and learn more about you, or more about you that we didn't cover here, I guess is the way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said again, Rami, if there wasn't anything else, I will let you get on with your day.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciated this.
No, you know, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you. I'm glad we were able to make it work. I'm glad we were able to, you know, talk. It was fun getting to speak with you.
Same thing. Have a good one.
So thanks again to Rami for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Road Steep. And be sure to check out the episode description for links to socials, websites, and other means that allow you to learn more about or support Rami and the podcast. And while you're doing that, be sure to like, follow, and be sure to share if those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks. Till next time.